Good morning, everyone. It is Father's Day, June 19th, 2022. This is Man Coverage, college football's finest, with Knoxville Nate and James P. Bonneville. James, how are you doing today, sir?
Not too bad, my friend. I mean, really, it's who's your daddy day too, as well. And there's a few people I think that I want to reach out to make sure that did they get a card from their lesser one? Like, for example, did Alabama get a card from Texas A&M? Because obviously, since that press conference, Alabama's Texas A&M's daddy. Kansas football, once again, Texas, you better be getting that card in and at least a call. Hey, and the NCAA, you better be giving the NIL money a card and a call as well, because they are your daddy. That is definitely for sure. I mean, anybody else you're thinking of, Nate, that you want to put out there that is someone's daddy that they should be recognizing today?
Well, I think we should give a shout out to the folks up north that run out of that whore Ann Arbor area, who have beat us all of once in the last 20 years and have been running their mouths. I didn't hear anything for 10 years, and then this year I've been hearing all sorts of stuff from our little baby brother or baby boy. And that being the Michigan Wolverines. But, you can win one game. That doesn't mean that all of a sudden the tide has turned. They're still our bitch. And we still own them in the modern era. So they beat us once in the Jim Harbaugh era. I think Urban Meyer was 7-0, 8-0.
That he had a room at his restaurant specifically dedicated to every victory he had over Michigan. He never had a loss.
Never had a loss. And Jim Tressel, I believe, was 9-1. Our new coach, Ryan Day, is 3-1, I believe, maybe 2-1, because the one year they didn't even show up and refused to come to Columbus, citing some sort of virus. And that's pretty sad when you don't even show up against your biggest rival and never even make the flight, and are afraid to play them. That's pretty sad. But yeah, heard a lot of noise from them this year, which was interesting because I didn't know any of these people because I hadn't heard from them in 10 years. So it's nice to get a call from these folks every once and again. But yeah, it's Father's Day. It's great to hope everybody's getting to spend some time with their families, and also take a little time out of your day, talk a little college football, because this is basically the off season, I would say, but there really isn't an off season anymore because recruiting goes on all year long. Scouting always goes on. There's lots of camps actually going on right now. Ohio State's camp was last week, for example. Tons of other schools are doing their camps where
Vanderbilt's doing one right now.
Yeah, today. And they kind of pose them as camps for these kids to come and learn from the coaches. But really what they're trying to do is get free recruiting and be able to bring these guys on campus, not have to treat them as recruiting visits. And then they kind of use them as such to identify guys, and also to try and sweeten the deal a little bit. So lots of camps happening, and a lot of people are still trying to figure out who's going to be their starting quarterback going into 2022. As we know, that's the most important position. That's kind of what we've geared today's show around and what we're going to talk about. And I thought what we might do first is get into the transfer QBs. Some guys didn't have a dude on the roster that they really thought was going to be their guy, or their guy left and went somewhere else. So I thought we might start off talking a little bit about who these guys are. We've discussed it a little bit on our show throughout, but I'd like to know, I'd like our listeners and our viewers to know who are the top transfer quarterbacks for 2022. And I want to get your take, James, on who you think is going to be the most successful of these guys that is either left to school and gone somewhere else, transferred through the portal, what have you. I think the guy that we have to talk about first, obviously, is the number one guy, and that's Caleb Williams, obviously leaving Oklahoma, going to USC. Do you think he's going to be the most successful of these transfer quarterbacks? Obviously, he didn't start all of last year, but he did come in, replace Spencer Rattler, threw for almost 2,000 yards, 21 touchdowns, only 4 interceptions. He looks pretty good out there in year one. James, what do you think about Caleb Williams, and do you think he's going to be the most successful of all these transfer guys?
I do. I really do. I mean, not only that, but you combine that with a receiving core, which, let's be honest, no matter how good or bad USC has been, the staple of that team has always been outstanding receivers. And you look at what they bring in this year. You've got Mario Williams, the transfer from Oklahoma. You've got Jordan Addison, the Blitnikoff winner transferring in from Pitt. I mean, you really have stacked up in a conference where defense, outside of a few teams like Washington and Utah, is really an afterthought. And I think they have a legitimate chance to do some damage year one under the new Lincoln Riley regime. I think the big key is going to be rebuilding that offensive line and doing something on that defense. But from a strictly quarterback perspective and numbers, I think you got to lead it off with Caleb Williams. And I think there's a huge he is his own tier amongst himself. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, man. I mean, I liked what I saw from him in year one. I mean, I liked the way that he came in, took over. He didn't look like a freshman to me. I mean, he was a playmaker. He looked like he had a pretty good grasp of Lincoln Riley's offense, which isn't really an easy one, to get under. I mean, the fact that I don't think really anyone's taken into account what these guys have done. I mean, if you go back to Baker Mayfield, who came in from Texas Tech, if you go back to Kyler Murray, who transferred from Texas A&M, Jalen Hurts, who came in, from Alabama, and then now Caleb Williams, who was essentially a freshman last year. These guys have come in a short period of time and grasped this, somewhat complicated offense and thrived in it. And I think that's because Lincoln Riley's very good about tailoring his offense to the strengths of his players. And I think he'll do that again once he gets to USC. And one of the things that I think is going to be, probably one of the hugest benefits of Caleb Williams and USC in whole is, like you mentioned, playing in the Pac-12. I mean, I don't know who's going to give him a tough time out there. I mean, Oregon had a pretty decent year last year. What happens? Mario Cristobal bolts and takes the money and runs back to Miami. So, I mean, what is Oregon going to be? I have no idea. Arizona State has lost almost their entire coaching staff. They lost their quarterback. They don't scare me. Washington, as you mentioned, hasn't been the Washington that we've known the past few years and has taken a turn downward. Cal has not impressed me. Stanford has gone down. Utah is really the only team that I think can give some competition to USC based on what I saw last year. Who do you think in the Pac-12? I mean, we're talking quarterbacks today, but I mean, Caleb Williams, who's going to stop him? Which team in the Pac-12 scares you, James?
I mean, Utah would be the next best thing, in my opinion. I mean, everybody else has problems. I mean, I think Caleb DeBoer is going to do good at Washington, but they're going to be good on defense this year and questionable on offense. And I think who they start at quarterback there is going to be a major key. And hopefully, I think it's Michael Penix, since they have that relationship from Indiana. You look at a team like Oregon. I mean, they lost so much in their defensive backfield. That is going to be a casualty to them. And let's be honest, in the Pac-12, you throw the ball quite a bit. UCLA, I mean, they're going to run the ball hard. Defensively, they got to do better. I mean, if they're going to take that next step, they've got to do better. But you look at the rest of that conference, I mean, it's a dumpster fire. Cal can't score, but you're going to be in a dogfight. They're not going to allow you to score much. Their defense is really solid. The Shaw stuff in Stanford still, I don't get. I don't understand them. I think they'll be a little bit better this year. I really like the recruiting class coming in, but I mean, right now I got to pick USC to win the Pac-12. I mean, Utah is going to be tough, though. I mean, if there's someone that's going to take them off, it would be Utah. And Cam Rising, I think, is doing a fantastic job in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, they impressed me quite a bit in that Rose Bowl contest versus Ohio State. I have to admit, as a Buckeye fan, I was really worried watching how the beginning of that game went and even watching to how the end went. I mean, our defense struggled to stop them. and their offense really, really impressed me. So we'll see. And they got to keep a lot of their guys. I mean, I know Devin Lloyd is gone and they lost a few dudes, but their core is returning. So I think that's really the only person who's going to give them trouble. And I think Caleb Williams is going to have a lot of success just based on the fact of who they're playing as far as USC's competition. So that's why I kind of give him the edge as far as who's going to thrive the most as far as transfer quarterbacks go. He's got his same coach. He's going to be running the same system. I mean, I know some of the players are different, but he got to bring his number one wide receiver with him, and he's got the same coach. So I like him. The guy that's getting a lot of pub, obviously, and who's ranked number 2 on this 247 list is, my boy who went to Ohio State for 3 months, and that's Quinn Ewers. I mean, this guy really hasn't stepped on the field yet in college football. I know he was the number 1 player in the country. I know he was the number 1 quarterback. I know he went to South Lake Carroll, put up big numbers there. But, the one thing that kind of concerns me is, A, it's Texas. And I hear this every year, how great Texas is going to be and how amazing their talent level is and how awesome their coach is going to be. And then I never really see it translate on the field. Now, I get it. This is a different guy. This is one of the most highly recruited guys ever coming out of high school football. But at the same time, South Lake Carroll won the state championship without him.
They're a pretty good program. I mean, it's not like, that's the part that drives me nuts about that is they're a really good program. It's not like it was Quinn Ewers and a bunch of scabs. I mean, you had some serious talent there. And I don't know. I have my reservations about this. Like, and I know we're going to talk a little bit of fantasy later on. I'm not so certain I would want him because, there's a high ceiling, but there is a tremendously low floor. Because if you watch film of him, his release point is all over the place. And the last person to have a release point like that in college was Pat Mahomes. Now, Pat Mahomes is a special player. But you look back at his college stats, specifically his sophomore year, 36 touchdowns, 15 interceptions. His junior year, before he came out, 41 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. That's a lot of interceptions.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you can get away with it when you got Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce and all that. I mean, Xavier Worthy's a talented individual. He's not Tyreek Hill. No. And I'm a little worried on his turnover rate. When they need to drive the ball down the field methodically, can they do it other than just handing off to Bijan Robinson? And that's what gives me pause. I would put a couple other people ahead of the mullet on this list, but I could see just on the height factor alone, Quinn Ewers, they'd be put him in 2. I mean, he's got a tremendous arm, but with their release point where it is, man, I'm telling you, he's got a pick 6 just waiting for him on an out pattern. It's bound to happen because someone's going to break on that because he relies too much on his arm to bail him out.
Yeah, I may stand corrected. It looks like they potentially might have lost in the state championship game to Duncanville. But they were 14-0.
Either way, it's Texas. So, I mean, just getting back to the state championship. I mean,
in 6A?
I mean, that is such an accomplishment because that is so hard in that state. It is such – I mean, South Lake Carroll is a premier program in that state. I mean, there was this quarterback. You may have heard of him before, played at Purdue, Drew Brees. He's probably going to go in the Hall of Fame.
He definitely is. And that's my point. I mean, this high school team still had success. And what kind of bothered me about him was, he left and decided to quit on his high school team his senior year and enroll early into college, which, I guess.
Hey, if someone was going to offer you 7 figures, would you not do the same thing if you had the ability to? I don't know if I blame you.
I don't know. No one's ever done that. No one's ever offered me that much money. But, it's just, to me, I feel bad for the kid, honestly. I feel
I do
bad for
too.
him
I think there's a
because
lot of pressure on this kid. I
there's a lot
really
of pressure on him. And, my senior year of high school was one of the most fun times I've ever had in my life. That's when, you take over as the leader. You're the big guy on campus. You kind of, you're the captain of the team. Being a captain of that team was really something that was special to me at Knoxville Catholic High School, and something that I'll never forget, especially with all the success that my high school's had since. So, think about the guys that have played there. Greg McElroy played at South Lake Carroll. I believe Kenny Hill, who I'm wearing today, was from South Lake Carroll. And not to mention Chase Daniel. And there's been some other pretty good players out of there. And it's,
exactly. My biggest problem is the savior complex that a lot of schools put on high school recruits. They forget these guys are 18 years old, and they view, unless they win at a minimum conference championships, not one, multiple, and if not a national championship, he's a bust. And I mean, that's a lot of pressure on a kid. And mind you, now we're in NIL where they're getting oodles and oodles of money, and they're expected to show up this stuff. This is a whole new game. And
that was my exact point.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pressure on this kid. And I mean, you don't really know until you are put into the spotlight. I mean, think about CJ Stroud last year. Guy never really played, he'd never been the starter for a college football team. And all of a sudden, not only are you expected to be the starting quarterback and pull the trigger on every play, but then you're expected to win every single game, and you're expected to perform every single Saturday. And, if you lose one game in Columbus, the sky is falling. And, I was really proud of the way that he played, especially bouncing back after that Oregon loss. You would have thought that this kid was going to be run out of town after that game. And he really kept his composure.
Something, you look back at that game, he wasn't the problem.
No.
I mean, offensively, they drove the field. They had a great receiving core. That defense just did not show up. And until a quarterback, like getting back to our Steve Bellisari interview, the quarterback gets too much credit and too much blame.
Right.
When they lose, I mean, name me a quarterback who starts on defense. I mean, besides Steve Bellisari, because he started off on defense before he became a quarterback. But, I mean, they can't go out and throw to themselves, all right? You can be the greatest quarterback in the world, but if you don't have receivers, it doesn't matter. Or for that matter, an offensive line. And they don't play on a half of the side of the field.
Right.
So
which is what worries me about Ewers. I mean, if you think about Texas last year, 5-7, 3-6 in the Big 12, 1-4 on the road. I mean, they lost to Arkansas 40-21. They lost to Oklahoma 55-48. They gave up 32 to Oklahoma State, 31 to Baylor. They gave up 57 to Kansas. That's my point. This guy doesn't play defense. And honestly, they haven't really brought much in as far as in the portal on defense. So I think their defense may struggle. I think he'll be all right. This guy can obviously throw the football, but I think there may be some growing pains, and I'm not sold on Texas just yet. So,
the one thing I've said about Texas for some time is the talent is unquestionable. They got it. All right. Their problem lands the gray matter between their ears, because you look back at that Oklahoma game, they were beating the piss out of Oklahoma, and then they just let the game slip away, and they don't know how to win. They know how to be in the lead, but they don't know how to close out. And they just expected that Oklahoma was just going to lay down. Name me a time that Lincoln Riley has just laid down.
Yeah.
I mean, he's lost games, but, man, they'll fight to the end.
He hasn't lost many, and he's a pretty good coach. I mean, he made the move quarterback and never looked back. And that's a guy that, like you said, Spencer wasn't really the problem. I mean, he was throwing some interceptions. He didn't look fantastic, but it wasn't like the offense wasn't moving and scoring points.
He was just conservative, honestly. Yeah. And I mean, to think of this way, you're taking the potential number one pick in the draft, the proverbial Heisman Trophy preseason winner, and you're putting him on the bench. You've got to have serious, serious stones to have that conversation with your AD and your boosters that next week. I don't care
Right.
how good Caleb Williams is. That's a
No,
ballsy move.
it was. And, that's why we've got Caleb Williams ranked number one. Ewers on this list is ranked number two. And then number three is the guy that Caleb Williams is replacing. And that's Jackson Dart, who came in as a freshman for USC last year. And really, I thought, turned the fortune of that team. I mean, he started 6 games. He completed almost 62% of his passes. He had almost 1,400 yards, 9 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. I thought the kid looked pretty good. And, to just run this kid off like that, I think is going to give him a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. And also, I think going to Ole Miss was the perfect spot for this kid in Lane Kiffin's offense. What do you think about Jackson Dart? This guy we talked about a little bit before, but as a transfer quarterback on this list, what do you think about his potential for success at Ole Miss and in the SEC?
Well, I think the potential is real, but I think the number here is too high. I think he is not third. I would put him more in the 6th category because I don't think there's enough data points on this kid. I mean, quite frankly, I'm not sure he's going to start quite yet. Luke Altmaier is no pushover, and he has been in that system for a few years now. And Lane Kiffin's system is not just plug and play. There's a lot of thinking that goes into that offense. I mean, look at the maturity level of Matt Corral during his time under Lane Kiffin. I mean, that player went from being possibly not drafted to look where he gets drafted this year. I mean, the Lane Kiffin effect is real. Do I think the kid's got talent? Yeah. Do I think the kid's a gunslinger? Absolutely. But I think there are other people I would put ahead of him that have more data points that could help benefit them later on.
Yeah, I mean, I think this, honestly, in my opinion, is one of the biggest battles coming into the fall. I mean,
Yeah.
Luke Altmaier and Jackson Dart battling it out for quarterback at Ole Miss. I think that really, to me, is one of the premier battles right now. Now, in a lot of the depth charts I've seen, a lot of the things, they've got Jackson Dart as the prohibited favorite, but I'm not so sure about that. I mean, like you said, Luke Altmaier was here last year. He played in the bowl game, didn't look great, but he was a freshman, and he kind of played like a freshman. And I think that, getting thrown into the fire like that did him well, and I think will serve him well in this competition. They've got Jonathan Mingo coming back as a wide receiver. Obviously they picked up the tight end, Michael Trigg, came with Jackson Dart. So Jackson's got some familiarity with him. But this is a team that, honestly, last year was pretty good on offense. They finished 10-3 overall. They were 10-2 going into that bowl game where, Matt Corral went down. And really, if Matt Corral doesn't get hurt, I could see them beating Baylor. And I think this is going to be a good team next year. It's just playing in that SEC West is brutal for whoever is going to be the starting quarterback. And God help them. They're going to have a tough go of it, whether it's Altmaier or whether it's Dart, playing against Bama, playing against Auburn, playing against A&M, LSU. I mean, Mississippi State is no joke. This is going to be a tough go for whoever wins that job, don't you think?
I agree.
So we'll see how he does. The other guy that I really want to talk about here is the kid that got replaced at Oklahoma, and that's Spencer Rattler. Transferred to South Carolina, which to some people was kind of, surprising. It didn't really surprise me. I think Shane Beamer's the real deal as a coach. I was honestly shocked that somebody didn't hire him away from South Carolina after the season that he had. Winning 7 games with that roster, to me, was unbelievable. Friend of the program, Montario Hardesty, is the running backs coach there and has done a hell of a job coaching up their running backs. And, this is a team that really came out of nowhere in the SEC East. No one picked them to be anywhere close to where they were. And their only issue was they had no quarterback. They had really nobody all year long behind center that could keep a consistent thumb on their offense. And I think Spencer Rattler is going to solve a number of problems for them. What do you think about Rattler going to South Carolina, and how do you think he's going to fare in the SEC East?
I think he's going to fare better than most people think. A lot of recency bias is going to be placed on Rattler, but there's one factor that I think nobody puts into consideration was where was Shane Beamer before he came to South Carolina? That's right. He was the assistant head coach at Oklahoma. He was part of that recruiting process. He knows how Spencer Rattler thinks. And now you bring him into a situation in Columbia. I mean, the SEC is Georgia and a bunch of, I mean, the talent pool is not as good as it was. South Carolina has a legitimate shot to finish second in the SEC East. And Spencer Rattler has the ability to do that. Now, I think Spencer's got to get out of his own head. And I think Shane Beamer's got that ability to do that.
Well, and I think that this move for him was the best thing he could possibly do. I mean, getting out of Oklahoma, he could have stayed there,
Yeah,
and probably would have been the starter for Venables when he got there. He could have stayed put, stayed home and just rode it out, but he didn't. And I think this was a really good move on his part. As you mentioned, he had familiarity with the coach. And if you look back, I always look back to 2020, which was, the year that Rattler started 11 games for Oklahoma. He completed almost, 67.5% of his passes, 3,000 yards in 11 games, 28 touchdowns to 7 picks. I was pretty impressed with him in 2020. And if he can get back to anything like what he looked like in 2020, this kid could really, really do something for the Gamecocks and their offense.
Yeah, I mean, his yards per pass went way down in 2021. And quite frankly, I think he was trying not to lose. And I think him getting in a more comfortable situation in Columbia, where, let's be honest, the hype of being the number one pick in the preseason, favorite for the Heisman Trophy is not going to be there. He can just sit there and play football and play his game.
Yeah, and there's not there's still going to be pressure on him, obviously, being the starting quarterback in the SEC and all that. There's going to be pressure, but the amount of pressure that was on him at Oklahoma to not only win every game, but also with somebody right behind him was real. And he's not going to have that anymore. I mean, the guy that was behind him, pushing him, Caleb Williams, is on the other side of the country. And really, there's nobody behind him at South Carolina that's going to make it, a fierce competition. This guy's going to be their starter. He's the best quarterback they have on this roster, hands down. And they're kind of handing the keys over to him. And I think looking back at the South Carolina offense last year, what they did was amazing, considering the hole that they had at quarterback. I mean, give these kids credit that got in there and did what they could, including one of them who was a graduate assistant who wasn't even on the roster, in the spring. So they did pretty well considering, but I think this is going to make Shane Beamer's offense a whole new ball game with somebody back there that can sling it like Spencer Rattler can.
Yeah, no, 100% agreed.
So,
one guy I want to talk about, though, actually two. I think Cam Ward and Dylan Gabriel should be higher. I mean, Cam Ward, you look at what he's bringing from Incarnate Word up to Washington State in that offense, and Eric Morris, his old OC, is coming with him. I mean, they're gonna throw bombs. I mean, just be prepared. It's gonna be freaking crazy train. And then Dylan Gabriel with Jeff Lebby again in Oklahoma. I mean, they have the familiarity there.
Yeah, that's the next two guys on this list. So why don't we talk about real quick? Why don't we talk about Gabriel first? This is a kid who, has had some success in college football. I mean, he put up some pretty big numbers at Central Florida. To be honest, I didn't really think the Gus Bus's offense was the best for him. I thought he looked better the year before. But this is a kid who's had some pretty good success. And I think, honestly, going to Oklahoma and, getting into a different style of offense is going to benefit him. What is the Oklahoma offense going to look like, in your opinion? And what is the ceiling for Dylan Gabriel in your mind?
I think you're going to go back to what he had at UCF. Honestly, I think early UCF is what you're going to see. It's going to be very high tempo. They're going to move. I mean, it's going to look very similar to what you see right now at Tennessee. There's a lot of comparisons you're going to see in that. I think it's going to be much more. I mean, for your older football fans, I think if you remember back when Kevin Sumlin and Kevin Wilson were the co-OCs under Bob Stoops, I think you're going to see a much similar offense to that back when Sam Bradford was the quarterback. They're going to throw up points. It's not going to even be funny.
Yeah, I mean, the good news for Dylan Gabriel is he's also going to have a little bit of a running game behind him. I mean, this Oklahoma team has a decent offensive line, in my opinion. They've got some decent running backs behind him that he can hand the ball off to, so he won't have all that pressure of having to completely put everything on his shoulders. And I think that's going to benefit him. I mean, this guy's there's still got some talent out there in Oklahoma, and you know, not everyone will say that, but I really believe it. Eric Gray, I've seen up close and personal here in Knoxville. Looks pretty good. They've got Marcus Major behind him and Javante Barnes, the freshman. So there's talent behind there, and I think this defense will be better under Venable's direction. So I think Gabriel's going to look pretty good back there. And as you mentioned, Cameron Ward, who's transferring in from Incarnate Word to Washington State, very, very good player who has put up huge numbers, and I think is going to make the transition pretty easily. What do you think about him transferring in to big Power 5 football compared to where he's been playing? How's that going to look like?
I think the combination of him and Eric Morris as their OC quarterbacks coach up in Pullman is really going to be the benefit there. I mean, you look back at his numbers in San Antonio and Incarnate Word. I mean, top 10 nationally offensively in 3 of the 4 seasons that Morris was the OC there. I mean, heck, they averaged 550 yards per game scoring. They were somewhere around 40 points per game. This is exactly what you want to see out of that Washington State offense, no matter who's coached there. It's when they've gotten away from that formula, going back to Mike Price and Erickson. When you get away from that formula, it doesn't work up there. You need to sling the ball around and get the ball on the edges of the field and get those speedy guys to go upfield quick with big yak yards. I think this is a big year for Cam Ward up in Pullman.
Well, and I mean, think about him. Just in 2021, he threw for over 4,600 yards, 47 touchdowns. I mean, I don't care where you're playing. That's big time. And this guy, he's not a little dude. I mean, I've heard some comparisons to Malik Willis just because of, where he played and, just kind of his game. But this guy's completely different than Malik Willis. Cam is 6'3", 225. He's got a big arm. He's only a sophomore, so he's just going to get better in my mind. And I think a lot of people are going to regret not bringing him into their program. And I think Washington State got a steal. I think he's better than any quarterback they've had in the last 2 or 3 years.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you look back at that program. I mean, you look at Cam Ward, the question that keeps coming up is, well, if he's so good, why didn't he get a D1 offer right away? Well, he played in a Texas system that ran the veer and it didn't throw the ball very much. Thank God Incarnate Word saw what he was capable of, probably saw him in a camp and gave him the opportunity. But you look at the numbers. I mean, it's not like they were playing some slugs. I mean, they beat Texas State last year, 42-34. Yep. I mean, you take on a Division I program on their field, and let me look at his numbers here. He went – here, bear with me here for 1 second.
Yeah, 384 for 590, 65% completion. When you're throwing the ball 590 times, completing almost 65% is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy train numbers, and this is a kid. Now you give him better talent, a better offensive line. But more importantly, the language stays the same. The play calling stays the same. This has got success written all over it.
Yeah. Well, let's get into our fantasy talk here in just one moment. The only other guys that I really wanted to hit on here are the guys that I think are going to have the best chance for success. Some of the guys from this list I'm not so sure of. One guy that's listed here is Max Johnson, who's transferring from LSU to A&M. Keaton Slovis, who's going from USC to Pittsburgh. And then also Connor Bazelak, who's going from Missouri to Indiana. Which of those three guys impresses you the most and is going to be the best fit at the transfer school that he's going to?
I would have to say one of the two would be either Keaton Slovis or Connor Bazelak. Both have great arms. I feel bad for Slovis. They lose Jordan Addison, but they do have that transfer coming in from Akron who was putting up monster yards in the MAC. Connor Bazelak has just got a live arm, and that was a big trouble spot for the Indiana offense last year where they had so many injuries at quarterback. I mean, the defense was still rock solid. It's just, if you can't move the ball, you're giving short field to your defense on a consistent basis. I think one of those two, Max Johnson, I'm not going to lie. I'm not a big fan of Texas A&M's offense. I think it is way too slow in this day and age, and you cannot turn the ball over. And Levi Williams, I like that he's going to Utah State. I think it's a good fit with him and Blake Anderson. But at the end of the day, he didn't show enough data points to really ball out completely. I think he was just, he had a big bowl game. He had a really big bowl game, and everybody remembers the last thing they saw from him. And I don't think there's enough there quite yet.
Yeah, I agree with you. The other guys on here, and these are the last ones we'll talk about. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about this before. Jaden Daniels going to LSU, Adrian Martinez going to Kansas State.
I like that one. I like that one a lot. Just the combination of him and Colin Klein, I think it just looks like got gangbusters written all over it.
Yeah, this is a team last year. No one really is talking about this, but Kansas State had a really good under the radar year last year. Winning 8 games. And honestly, I don't know. I keep going back and forth as to whether or not Adrian Martinez is an upgrade over Skylar Thompson. What do you think about that?
I think it is. Honest to God, I think the talent is real for Adrian Peterson. I just think the problem was he got in his head so much in Lincoln that I think a new environment could be the best thing for him. And Colin Klein has developed quarterback. People forget how good a quarterback Colin Klein was. There wasn't much of that offense when he was there. And it was Colin Klein and who gives a crap. And they won a Big 12 title with the guy. It's kind of amazing. And you could see he's developing that same kind of mindset he had when he was wearing the purple and silver.
Yeah, I agree. And the last dudes on this list are Casey Thompson, obviously going to Nebraska to take over from Martinez, Jerry Bohannon, who me and you just talked about, who had a pretty stellar year when he was out there for Baylor going to South Florida. Kind of shocked me, honestly, that they handed the starting job over to his, to the other guy we talked about in
Blake Shapen.
Blake Shapen and took Jerry Bohannon out of that starting role. And then you got Zach Calzada, who's going to Auburn, Bo Nix, who's leaving Auburn, going to Oregon. And then, the other dude we mentioned too was the gentleman from Indiana, Michael Penix, who had a great career at Indiana until he got injured, and he's moving to Washington. So those are the rest of the transfer guys. But really, I want to start talking about the fantasy. And we've got a lot of people now. This is a show that gets deep roots, college football breakdown, but college football fantasy is becoming a bigger and bigger thing. And I think it's something that our viewers and our listeners want to hear about and want to get some info on. And that's why we're going to start talking about it a little bit. We're going to start giving some information out there to all you guys about who we think is going to have success. We just talked about the transfer guys, but we're going to stay at that quarterback position and talk about who we think is going to dominate in college football fantasy in 2022. James, I know you've got your list going as to who you think is going to have the best seasons. I think the top 3 are pretty easy. And anyone who's drafting high, there may be a little bit of fogginess as to who their favorite guy is, but I think the top 3 are pretty set. Obviously, C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, Caleb Williams. Talk to me just for a minute about those 3 guys. who do you think you would take first if you were drafting number one out of those three options?
Mine would be very easy, and it would be C.J. Stroud. You look at that receiving core they have between Jackson Smith and Jigba, Harrison. I mean, you keep going on, and Fleming. I mean, the receivers just grow on trees up in Columbus. Plus, you have Travion Henderson at running back, and Stroud's going to distribute the ball around. I just, from a fantasy standpoint, if you have anything more, 4 points or more per touchdown pass, you've got to take C.J. Stroud as your number one pick just because those receivers are so amazing. I mean, what are your thoughts, Nate?
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking fantasy, you're talking about yards, you're talking about points, you're talking about touchdowns. And this kid showed last year that he can get it done. And I know Chris Olave's gone. I know that Garrett Wilson's gone. But we saw what this offense could look like, in the Rose Bowl without those two guys. I mean, He threw for 6 touchdowns and almost 600 yards without two of the greatest receivers in Ohio State history.
It was like watching a video game, honestly. It's every time you saw Jackson Smith and Jigba, it wasn't like he was a little bit open. He was wide open every single time, and he was getting yak after yak after yak. It was crazy. But, I mean, honestly, after that, on that tier 1 level, I got to go Bryce Young just based on the talent level. If he had better receivers coming back, I'd be a little more excited about it. If, I'm drafting, I'm looking at maybe tying Bryce Young and the Burton kid, the transfer they got from Georgia, with him so you can get double the points on that, because outside of him and Latu, there really isn't much there from a passing game standpoint. I mean, he's going to get the yards, but I think big yards, Burton's going to be the guy there. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Burton is the transfer from Georgia. And I think that was huge for them to get him, honestly, because Jamison Williams gone, John Mechie gone. Those were 2 big losses. And we kind of saw what this offense looked like without Jamison Williams and Mechie in the championship game. They struggled to get the big plays. I mean, they still moved the ball. They still got some yards, but it didn't look the same to me. So I think, having Jermaine Burton in the mix, JoJo Earl was a sophomore now. Ja'Cory Brooks is a sophomore. Those guys will get better. But, without that workhorse behind you, I mean, I know that they always have a great running back, and Jahmyr Gibbs is already ranked pretty high, but he hasn't seen a lot of action. And, Trey Sanders is back this year. But we don't have that running back who has already put up 1,000 yards in the SEC to kind of lean on. So I think that's why I give C.J. Stroud and I give Caleb Williams a little bit of a nod ahead of Bryce Young, because there's going to be a lot thrust on his shoulders. And I just don't think he has the playmakers that these other guys do yet. I think these guys will develop. I think by the end of the season, I think he'll be putting up numbers. But when you're talking about the start of the year and who I would take if I had the number one pick, I think I'd take Stroud first and Williams second. Bryce Young would be third if I was.
And that's a legit argument. I struggled more with Young and Williams than I did with putting Stroud number one. Like, who went two was the real struggle for me.
Yeah, and this offense moved last year and was the number one offense in the country, talking about Ohio State, and I think they're going to continue that. Now, we're focusing on quarterbacks today, so, let's talk about the next tier of guys behind those three. And I want to talk about your next three guys that you have on your list, especially as compared to another list. Your next three guys after those three are Sam Hartman out of Wake Forest, Dylan Gabriel out of Oklahoma, and then the kid from right here in Knoxville, Tennessee, Hendon Hooker. Talk to me a little bit about those three guys, why you have them ranked where you do, and why you think they're going to have success in 2022.
Well, a lot of this has to deal with, in all honesty, I would put Sam Hartman in that top four. I would make him fourth, but make him part of that tier one. But you look at the numbers he's put out, especially his touchdown to interception ratio. Heck, in 2020 alone, he had 5 interceptions, of which 4 of them happened against Wisconsin in the bowl game. And you combine that with A.T. Perry, who's that long boundary receiver, and who had 131 targets last year. Hartman's going to throw up numbers. I mean, quite frankly, he will be drafted on the first day of next year's draft. And where are they at next year? It's not Vegas. They're in, I can't even remember where they're drafting next year. I'm so used to saying New York that it's no longer New York. But I would put Hartman 4. Gabriel, the combination of him and Levy in that offense, is going to be high-powered. That's why you got to put him that high. And then at 6, Hendon Hooker. I mean, what you saw last year from that offense in year 1, and he put up 31 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. And Cedric Tillman is back, who had a success rate of 68%. The only person better than him in college football last year was Jackson Smith and Jigba at 72% at Ohio State.
Yeah, and what Hooker did was amazing, in my opinion. Throwing for almost 3,000 yards, 31 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. I mean, that is unbelievable. 31-3. Let's say that again, because that ratio is just out of this world.
Exactly.
And I was so impressed with him, not only throwing the football, but running the football. This isn't a guy that just took off because he had one read, and if his one read wasn't there, he left. That's not who I saw. I saw a guy who ran when it was open. He ran when there was called quarterback running plays. He ran when he was using his legs to get away from people, and there was a way to gain yards downfield and no one was open. But I didn't just see this guy that ran out of desperation. So he really impressed me, especially considering, the year he had before in Virginia Tech. I thought the offense that Josh Heupel put him in really gave him the best chance for success, especially considering he didn't even start at the beginning of the season. Joe Milton was the starter. Hendon Hooker was second, and Harrison Bailey was third, depending on who you talk to and depending on what day it was, because these guys were in a battle and a competition, and it was Heupel's first year, and most of those guys had just gotten here. He really didn't know who he was going with until the game started. And honestly, Hooker just got really comfortable once he got in the game. And once he got a handle on the offense, the only thing that worries me is some of the losses in the receiving corps. I'm not sure they've replaced some of those guys. I know Tillman's back, and Tillman, had some good, some good production to say. He wasn't the leading receiver at Tennessee, but he did have some decent production, and I think he will continue to do so. The problem that I have is Peyton's gone. Probably shouldn't have left, but did leave. Velus Jones got drafted in the 3rd round by the Chicago Bears, and their number 1 running back last year left and transferred to Louisville. So Evans. So that bothers me too. I just think they're going to have to find some guys, and I think it may take some of these guys a little while to get going in Knoxville in Heupel's offense. But somebody's going to get yards because this offense isn't going to stall. I think they're going to get better in year 2, don't you?
Agreed. I thought they came across way faster than I expected them to. And it's a good benefit to him in his development. I had my doubts when he went to Tennessee as a transfer. I wasn't sure if I saw it. And he, especially in the bowl game, just really impressed me. Like, it was constantly, every time he took a punch, he punched right back. And that's why I'm putting him as high as I am. I mean, quite frankly, I wanted to put him higher, but I was struggling doing that based on who was already there.
We're going to get into the next tier of guys in a second. I got a question for you because this is something that I've thought about in my mind a little bit. Hooker played for 3 years at Virginia Tech. 2018, he only saw action in 3 games, didn't have any stats. 2019, he played in 10 games. 2020, he played in 8 games. Last year, he played in 13. So this is a guy who's been around a little bit. He had the season he had, and because of the production he had, the 31 touchdowns, the 3 interceptions, 3,000 yards, almost completing 70%. This is a guy that could have gotten drafted this year. And as we saw, the quarterbacks in this draft were not really that highly thought of. Do you think he made a mistake coming back?
Only time's going to tell. That's a good question. I never even thought about that.
Don't you think he would have gotten drafted if he'd have come out?
Oh, yeah, he would have gotten drafted if he came out. Absolutely.
He goes to the combine. He has a pro day. He goes and works out for teams. I mean, I think he would have been rated higher than a lot of these guys that actually did get drafted. And I think he might have, been able to, I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking
That's a
third,
good
fourth
question. I
round.
never thought about that, but that's a legit question.
What if he has a bad year this year? What if Tennessee doesn't duplicate their success on defense? People have tape now on UT from Josh Heupel's offense that they didn't have a year before. I'm not saying that that's going to lead to them not having success. I'm not saying that there's no way they can still put up numbers. My only thought is, what if he takes a step backwards? He's not going to be in the same – and there's a lot better quarterbacks coming out in the 2022 draft, which I believe is in Cleveland, than it was the year before.
Well, I'm seeing some of these mocks, and they've got Will Levis in the first round. Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry. Is there like some other tape of Will Levis that I haven't seen that I'd like to? I mean, is there like some like street football that's going on that they got film on? Because I mean, now you take Wan'Dale Robinson off this team, and his yards per pass number was already small. And you take Wan'Dale Robinson, who was Mr. Yak himself. I mean, this isn't going to get better. It's going to get worse. In some cases, much, much worse. Yeah. I don't get it. I would have taken Hendon Hooker over him in a heartbeat. Honestly, thinking about it, I think Hooker would have probably been late second, third round pick this year's draft at quarterback. Yeah, I would have said that. I mean, granted, I don't know what else is going on in the background. Is there an injury issue that he didn't come out for? I don't know. But, I mean, what I saw from Hooker this year, I was incredibly impressed. Heupel did a very good job developing his headspace and really implementing that offense with him and Hooker together. They're a good combination. I'm looking forward to seeing what they can build this year. I mean, heck, in our SEC show, I picked Tennessee to finish second ahead of Kentucky. Yeah. In the SEC.
Yeah, I did East. Not. I actually picked South Carolina to finish ahead of them, but we'll see what happens there. I just was saying that I just had a thought, did this guy hurt himself by not coming out in the draft? Because he was thinking about it, and that was something he was definitely considering, was leaving and coming out in this draft. And I just thought, with the season he had and the quarterbacks in the 2022 draft, next year, actually, it's in Kansas City. I was wrong. Cleveland's the year after that. Next year is Kansas City. So I just thought, he may have hurt himself by staying, but we'll see what happens. The next group that I want to get into after Hooker, this is something that a lot of people are kind of, going back and forth on, is who do you pick if you don't have a selection in the first six? Who do you take? And do you take a quarterback over a running back or a wide receiver based upon where you're drafting? Now, let's talk about the guys you've got. Cameron Ward, we've already discussed as being a transfer.
Don't forget Malik Cunningham, too.
Yeah, Malik Cunningham from Louisville, who seems like he's been there for 10 years. And then Will Rogers from Mississippi State. Those three guys are all obviously going to put numbers up. Those offenses, relative to what the team does record-wise, those offenses are still going to score points and get yards. Do you take one of those three guys, or do you start looking at running back, wide receiver at that point?
It depends on how your league is set up from a point system. Like, I've heard some leagues that have 6 points for throwing a touchdown, and then I would still look at quarterback. If not, that's when you start looking at running backs and receivers. And then future shows, we'll talk about that. I think the receiver cast is very deep. I think there is a definite top tier, but I think you can hold off and find some really good receivers down in that 15 to 20 range too, of just the receiver draft. Running backs is a different story, where there is definitely a top end level of running backs. And I'll be honest with you, Braylon Allen will be my number one running back that I will take off the board, the running back out of Wisconsin. Everybody's going to sit there and think, why not Travion Henderson? You know something? Ohio State's going to get up big, and Ryan Day is going to take him out. And you're going to see a lot of days where Travion Henderson may have a touchdown and 60 or 70 yards, and he's done for the day.
Yeah, we saw that a lot last year.
Exactly. They're
Well,
going
and
to hold on
the
to him.
even the games where he was playing at the end, they still always think about, keeping their guys fresh. And Mike Williams is going to get carries. Evan Pryor is going to get carries. They're not just going to put Travion Henderson out there for 35 carries, 30 carries a game.
Not only that, look at the receiving core. They got to spread that ball around. I mean, if you don't get Fleming and who's the other receiver there? It's Fleming, Harrison, Jackson Smith, and Buka. Yeah. They're going to spread the ball out to those four guys a lot more. So you got to be careful from a yards perspective how much those guys are going to get.
Yeah. And that's why I was asking the question, if you're drafting 7th overall, do you take Braylon Allen? Do you take Shipley from Clemson? Do you take one of these workhouse backs over these quarterbacks? And I agree. I think you do, just because those guys are going to get a ton of carries. And, you think about Kenneth Walker last year at Michigan State. Some people slept on him in fantasy, and they got burned. They got burned because of it. But yeah, I mean, and just to round out, Marvin Harrison Jr. will be starting at wide receiver for Ohio State. Julian Fleming, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. And then you've also got, as I said, Emeka Ibuka. You got Cameron Babb. You got Jalen Ballard. You've got the freshman, Caleb Brown, Kyan Graves. Xavier Johnson, the redshirt senior, is going to get some catches. That receiving core is just absolutely ridiculous. And Brian Hartline is doing a hell of a job bringing wideouts in there in Columbus.
Well, I mean, heck, you could put Tonga Vailoa or Quinn Ewers in the first round. I mean, but my problem with Tonga Vailoa at Maryland is, can Maryland ever stay healthy? No. I mean, you look at the receiving core between Demas and Jarrett. I mean, outside of Ohio State, that's probably the second best receiving core in the country. And nobody knows about him because it's Maryland. And Tonga Vailoa is a much better throwing quarterback than his brother was at Alabama. And Quinn Ewers, you just don't know what you're going to get yet. Phil Jurkovec. I mean, Phil Jurkovec, you look at Boston College's offense last year when he was hurt. It made Cal look like it was a freaking up-tempo offense. I mean, they were awful. Now you bring him back, and it's going to be interesting to watch and see how that plays out.
Yeah, and Tagovailoa, I don't think gets the credit he deserves. I mean, honestly, Maryland struggled on defense last year big time. They had injuries, but this guy still put up big-time numbers. I mean, he almost threw for 4,000 yards. He was 10th in college football with 3,860 yards. He had 26 touchdowns, quarterback rating of 70.3, completed in 2021, completed 69.2% of his passes. I don't think he gets the credit that he deserves based 100%. On the year he put up last year.
I mean, the problem is when he has bad games, he has really bad games.
This is true.
I mean, him against Iowa is his kryptonite. I mean, I've never seen a quarterback look that bad except who was that one pro quarterback that had like 5 picks in one half? And it was
that was the guy from Tennessee, Nathan Peterman.
Peterman, yes.
He was the worst quarterback I've ever seen at Tennessee. And then he transferred to Pittsburgh and actually did pretty well there and ended up getting drafted in the NFL. Had a couple decent games in Buffalo. And then, as you mentioned, threw 6 picks in one quarter.
I mean, it was almost comical. Like, you wanted to feel bad for the kid, but it was just like, holy crap. It was just that bad. But I've seen games where this guy is just throwing up freaking monster yards.
Yeah, I mean, the Iowa game was not good. They lost 51-14. Tagovailoa was 16 of 29 for 157 yards, his season low. He was 55% completion, which was more than 20 percentage points below his regular. He threw 2 touchdowns, but he had 5 interceptions, a QBR of 40.3. That was a horrible game for him. And the thing is that it was the game after Ohio State, which he didn't really look good against Ohio State either. He was 28 of 29 for 279 and had 2 picks in that game as well. So two rough games in a row for him. But other than that, the season looked pretty good.
You know a name we forgot to talk about during the transfer portal that I think is a huge sleeper here before we close it out You and I have talked about this offset, is John Reese Plumlee.
And you're talking about transfer having success, or are you talking fantasy?
Both. I'm talking both. I mean, most people, if you don't remember him, he and Corral used to split some time at Ole Miss. Prior to and even early in during the Kiffin administration, and now he heads to Orlando.
like he's a president.
Well, heck, let's be honest. Kiffin is the president of Oxford. I mean,
he's the president of Mississippi, I think.
You now put Reese Plumlee, who, let's be honest, his arm is questionable, but you can't deny the legs. And you bring him to the bounce house with the Gus Bus, and we know what he can do with quarterbacks that can run. I mean, there was this quarterback, you may have heard of him, called Nick Marshall, who was a quarterback in junior college, played quarterback, and took them to the national championship game.
Yeah, beat Alabama.
The kick six game. Yep. John Reese Plumlee, I'm telling you, this has got star written all over it, and it's got fantasy gold. It's a guy you don't want to have as your number one quarterback unless you really load up on your other positions and you have to grab somebody. Then this is the next guy you grab. But if you want him as your number two, it is solid goal as a number two, and then you can sit there and work the matchups.
Well, I think he's gonna put up some decent numbers. The only thing I worry about is it's been a while since he's played quarterback. I mean, really, 2019 was the last time he started. Several games at quarterback. I mean, he was 79 and 150.
Nick Marshall was a cornerback, and the next year Gus took him to the national championship. You look at every quarterback he had after that, though, they cared more about throwing the ball than they did running the ball. That's why I like Bo Nix. I just didn't understand why he went to play for Auburn for Malzahn. It wasn't the right fit. Like going to Alabama would have been a better fit for him.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of his, and I think he may struggle. That's one of the reasons I didn't mention him in our transfer, because we were talking about transfers that we thought were going to have success, and I honestly don't think he's going to. Will he be the starter at Oregon? I don't know. I really, I'd have to go up there and see practice to tell you who I think who's going to win the job. But I definitely think that competition is still going on. Right now, Bo Nix is kind of penciled in, but they've got Ty Thompson. They've got Jay Butterfield. Both those guys are redshirt freshmen. And really, if they had anybody besides those two guys, I think he probably wouldn't be their first option.
But remember, in every fantasy draft you're in, you're going to have your homers. So read your room, because let's be honest, if you're in a league with some Georgia folks, there is going to be the person who's going to pick Stetson Bennett as their quarterback in their league. Just pre-predict for that and put in that variation while you're putting your own draft sheets together.
Hey, I'm done ripping on Stetson.
Trent Dilfer won a Super Bowl too as well. Doesn't mean he led the team to a Super Bowl.
That is true. That is true. I'm just saying, man, this kid, I did not think they would be able to win the national championship with him playing quarterback. I didn't think it was possible, but and he still didn't really tear it up numbers wise. I mean, he threw for 2,800 yards. He played in 14 games. He had 29 touchdowns, over 7 picks, and that's a pretty decent ratio.
Yeah.
But I just didn't think he'd be able to, go toe to toe with Bryce Young and win the national championship game. I didn't see that happening. I have to admit.
Yeah. Agreed.
So, all right. Well, we talked a little bit about the quarterbacks. Let's mention here some of the guys that we have next on our list. We went down to Will Rogers. You have Tanner Mordecai, Tagovailoa, who we mentioned, Quinn Ewers, and then Phil Jerkovich from Boston College, who we mentioned. The guy after that I wanted to talk about is Aiden O'Connell from Purdue. I'm really high on him. I watched him play down the stretch at the end of the season. I watched him play even against Ohio State, which was a pistol whipping. This guy still put up numbers. And the guy you have after that is DTR, Thompson Robinson from UCLA. Initially, we kind of thought that Dylan Gabriel, when he committed to UCLA, might win that job. But now with DTR, definitely going to be cemented as the starter. And what is he, 7 years he's been there? I mean, he's
on the Christian Laettner plan. He's got to be going for a doctorate at some point, you know.
He's been the starting quarterback at UCLA for a decade. So hell, he's got to know the offense at this point. And I'm with you. I kind of liked where you had him because, you know, if you don't have a number one pick and your first draft position is 7th or later, I say go ahead and get your running back and then come back in round 2, get Aiden O'Connell, get DTR, Grayson McCall from Coastal Carolina.
Heck,
one of those
Jake
guys.
Haener. I love Jake Haener at Fresno State. I mean,
Hey,
honest to God, Jake Haener has the capability of coming in and being a first-day draft pick in 2023. He was phenomenal last year.
there's no doubt. And, you know, some other names, Tyler Van Dyke from Miami had put together a pretty good season.
Yes.
Devin Leary from North Carolina State looked very good at times last year. So those are some other names you can think of. Obviously, we've got, you know, Jarrett, how do you pronounce his last name? Dodge from Western Kentucky.
Oh, Dogie.
Excuse
Yep.
me. Yeah, well, you know, lots of people didn't know about his predecessor and what he threw for 62 touchdowns last year in that offense. So Western Kentucky's going to put up some stats. There's no doubt about that.
Tyler Show at Texas Tech. This is a kid who lost out the starting job at Oregon and transferred down to Texas Tech. And you may not remember this, but that OC at Western Kentucky, Zach Kitely, is now the OC in Lubbock. And that is going to be interesting to watch what that could do because Show's got a big arm. He's got a big arm.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about a minute ago when we were talking about Bo Nix potentially winning the starting job. I feel like if Show was still in Oregon, I feel like he would be the starter or at least the leader in the clubhouse to start that season at quarterback.
I questioned why he transferred when he did. I was wondering that he was trying to bite off more than he can chew. But honestly, you put him in Texas Tech with Zach Kitely, that may be even a better option for him for that next level look. I mean,
yeah, no, I'm just saying, as far as program status goes, I look at the Ducks ahead of Texas Tech.
Oh, way past them. You're 100% spot on.
I feel like he could have, you know, increased his draft value and increased his NIL money, all that kind of stuff that these kids are looking to do these days if he'd stayed put up there in Oregon.
Definitely.
Why don't we get back at it? We'll talk a little bit more about, you know, the quarterbacks, but then we'll get into some running back options and some wide receivers. I feel like next show, if we can get into running backs and wide receivers, we can really help some of the people with their fantasy drafts because those are going to be coming up for people pretty soon. As we mentioned, C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, Hendon Hooker is actually ranked 3rd on some of these Fantrax ratings. They've got Hooker up as high as 3rd. They also have Ewers 4th, so I don't know about that. But their ranking goes Caleb Williams, Malik Cunningham, Sam Hartman, who we mentioned, Rodgers, Brendan Armstrong for Virginia, who we haven't talked about. Both of us kind of think he may take a step back this year.
You look at all they lost, I can't see how he does better. I think he's got to take a step back.
Yeah, I agree. And the rest of these guys we all mentioned, Anthony Richardson is on this list. I'm not as high on him as some people at Florida.
Some people have him going in the 1st round. I'm like,
no,
let the guy succeed a little bit first.
Let him at least start the entire year as the starter because he couldn't even win the job over Emory Jones, who is another guy we didn't talk about, but who transferred and is going to be at a new location next year after leaving Florida. I think he went to Arizona State, if I'm not.
He did. Yeah. Well, I mean, heck, now that Treylon Burks is gone at Arkansas, I'm not going to lie. KJ Jefferson is going to take a severe step back.
Yeah.
I mean, that Burks was a generational receiver in Fayetteville.
Yeah, I agree. And we'll see what that offense looks like. I think it's going to be primarily a running offense this year because he just kind of chucked it up to Treylon Burks, and it worked a lot of the time. But he's not going to have that luxury in 2022.
I agree.
All right. Well, go be with your family, buddy. Enjoy yourself. I hope everybody enjoyed our quarterback special today. We're going to break down a lot more of this fantasy stuff as we move forward and definitely get you guys ready for your 2022 drafts so that you're ready for success and can win some money as we move forward because that's what it's all about, right?
You got it.
All right,
Are we gonna put this our list on the page too as well for the on-demand cast?
Yeah, I think we're going to put the quarterback list up now, and then we'll do running backs and receivers next show. But everybody will get to see the list that we went off of today, which James has gone and created it up to, I believe, over 70 quarterbacks, just in case you have a 2 or 3 deep league.
Well, yeah. I mean, you could have those leagues where you have 30 teams in it. I was in a league 20 years ago that had 45 teams in it, or 46. It was crazy. And I got out of it after like the 10th year when you started having people getting upset about getting a freshman out of San Jose State that I'd never heard of. And I was like, all right, I'm done. I'm out. This is too much. When San Jose State freshmen, backup receivers are being getting fought over, I'm like, I'm out. So
yeah, that's when the waiver wire is pretty thin.
Oh yeah, there is no waiver wire.
No.
Yeah. You're looking at walk-ons.
Everybody's on the roster. So, all right. Well, I enjoyed it. I hope everybody enjoyed it today. Keep yourself safe and enjoy your Father's Day Sunday. We'll be back next week to break it down for you and get into the running backs and receivers because those are the money positions, right?
Absolutely. And make sure you like and subscribe the page too as well.
Yep. And check us out on YouTube. Go up there and search for Man Coverage, and subscribe is there as well. Adios, amigos.
Hey, we'll talk.
All right, bud. Have a good one.
You too now. Bye.